For 3 years, Sarah Mitchell trusted her best friend with her life. Every night, Jessica handed her medication. Every night, Sarah swallowed without question. But on November 14th, 2019, something made Sarah pretend. She tucked those pills under her tongue, and what she discovered over the next 48 hours would expose a betrayal so twisted, even the FBI called it one of the most diabolical cases of the decade. This is a true story. 3 years of drugging. One night changed everything. And by the end of this, you'll understand why the person sleeping in the room next to you might be the most dangerous person in your entire life. By the time you finish watching this story, you'll know the answers to 3 questions that even seasoned investigators struggled to comprehend. Question 1. Why would a best friend systematically drug someone for 3 consecutive years? Question 2. What was Jessica's real endgame, and how close did she actually come to succeeding? And question 3. What happened when Sarah finally caught her in the act, and why did it take so long for anyone to believe her? This isn't just a story about betrayal. This is about how someone you love, someone you trust completely, someone who sleeps just 20 feet away from you every single night, can orchestrate your destruction with a smile on their face. And before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Sarah Mitchell was 34 years old in the spring of 2016 when her life began to unravel in ways she couldn't have predicted. She lived in Portland, Oregon, in a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the east side of the city, where rain fell more days than it didn't, and the cost of living was climbing faster than most people could keep up with. Sarah worked as a dental hygienist at a small practice downtown, the kind of place where patients knew her by name, and she knew their kids' birthdays. She made decent money, not great, but enough to cover rent and groceries and the occasional trip to the coast with her 9-year-old daughter, Emma. Sarah was divorced. The marriage had ended 2 years earlier, not with fireworks or drama, but with the quiet acknowledgement that she and her ex-husband David had grown into different people who wanted different lives. David had remarried quickly, to a woman named Jennifer who worked in real estate and drove a white Lexus and had opinions about organic snacks. Emma split her time between both households, 1 week with Sarah, 1 week with David and Jennifer, and Sarah lived for the weeks when Emma was home, when the apartment felt less empty and the silence less suffocating. But divorce changes you in ways people don't talk about enough. It isolates you. Sarah's friends from the marriage, the couples they used to have over for barbecues and game nights, they all drifted toward David and Jennifer because Jennifer was better at hosting, and David was better at keeping in touch. Sarah's family lived on the other side of the country, in North Carolina, where her parents had retired to a small town near the mountains, and her brother Mark worked as an accountant and lived a quiet life with his wife and 2 kids. They called every few weeks, but it wasn't the same as having someone nearby, someone who could show up when you needed them. Sarah felt lonely. Not the dramatic kind of loneliness you see in movies, but the slow, creeping kind that settles into your bones and makes you question whether anyone would really notice if you disappeared for a while. And that loneliness made her vulnerable in ways she didn't recognize at the time. Jessica Adams appeared in Sarah's life again like a ghost from the past, slipping into her inbox on a Tuesday afternoon in March of 2016 with a message that seemed almost too perfectly timed. "Hey Sarah, it's been forever. I saw you're living in Portland now. I just moved here last month. Would love to catch up if you're free." Jessica and Sarah had been roommates in college, 15 years earlier at the University of Washington in Seattle. They'd shared a cramped dorm room their freshman year, then an off-campus apartment their sophomore year, and they'd been close in that intense way college friendships often are, built on late-night conversations and shared struggles and the intoxicating freedom of being away from home for the first time. But after graduation, they'd lost touch. Jessica had moved to California, or maybe it was Arizona. Sarah couldn't quite remember. They exchanged a few emails and holiday cards for a year or two, then nothing. 15 years of silence. And now here she was, reaching out, saying she'd just moved to Portland and had no one and needed a friend. Sarah responded immediately. She suggested coffee that weekend, and Jessica showed up looking almost exactly as Sarah remembered her, maybe a little thinner, a little more tired around the eyes, but still with that same wide smile and easy laugh that had made her so fun to be around in college. They spent 3 hours at a cafe near Powell's Books, catching up, filling in the gaps of 15 years. Jessica said she'd been living in Denver for the past decade, working in hospitality management, but things had gotten complicated. She'd been in a relationship that turned toxic, she said, and she needed to get away, start fresh somewhere new. She'd chosen Portland because she'd always loved the Pacific Northwest, and she thought maybe she could rebuild her life here. She didn't have a job yet, she admitted. She didn't have much money. She was staying in a cheap motel near the airport and looking for work, but it was harder than she'd expected. Sarah listened, and she felt something stir in her chest, a mix of sympathy and recognition. She knew what it felt like to start over. She knew what it felt like to be alone in a city that didn't feel like home yet. Before Sarah could talk herself out of it, she offered Jessica her spare bedroom. "Just until you get back on your feet," she said. "Rent-free. I've got the space, and honestly, it would be nice to have someone around." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. She hugged Sarah across the table, said thank you over and over, said she didn't know what she would have done without this kindness. Sarah felt good about the decision. She felt like maybe this was the universe giving her back something she'd lost, a friendship, a companion, someone to fill the silence. Jessica moved in 3 days later with 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. That was all she owned, she said. Everything else had been left behind in Denver, and she didn't want any of it anyway. She wanted a clean slate. The first few weeks were good. Jessica cooked dinner most nights, elaborate meals that filled the apartment with smells of garlic and herbs and roasted vegetables. She cleaned obsessively, scrubbing the kitchen until the counters gleamed, vacuuming the living room every other day, organizing Sarah's bookshelves and cabinets without being asked. Sarah came home from work exhausted most evenings, and Jessica would have a glass of wine waiting, dinner in the oven, and they'd sit on the couch and talk about their days. Jessica was looking for jobs, she said, but the market was tough. She had a few interviews, but nothing had panned out yet. Sarah told her not to worry, to take her time, that she wasn't in any rush. Jessica started helping with Emma too, picking her up from school on Sarah's custody weeks, making her snacks, helping with homework. Emma liked Jessica. She said Jessica was funny and nice and made better pancakes than Sarah did. Sarah felt relieved. She felt like she'd made the right choice. But there were small things, little oddities that Sarah noticed but didn't think much of at the time. Jessica was always there. Not in an intrusive way exactly, but in a way that made Sarah realize she was never truly alone anymore. When Sarah came home, Jessica was there. When Sarah woke up in the morning, Jessica was already in the kitchen making coffee. When Sarah's friends called to invite her out, Jessica would hover nearby, listening, and then later she'd make a comment about how those friends didn't seem very supportive or how they didn't really understand Sarah the way Jessica did. Sarah started declining invitations. It was easier than dealing with Jessica's subtle disapproval, and besides, she was tired most of the time anyway. Work was stressful. Emma was going through a phase where she cried every time she had to leave Sarah's apartment to go back to David, and Sarah felt stretched thin, like she was barely holding it together. Jessica became the one constant, the one person who seemed to understand without Sarah having to explain. About 6 months after Jessica moved in, Sarah started taking medication for anxiety. She'd been to her doctor for a routine checkup, and she'd mentioned feeling stressed, having trouble sleeping, feeling on edge all the time. The doctor had asked a few questions, then written her a prescription for Xanax, a low dose, just to take the edge off. Sarah filled the prescription and started taking it at night before bed. It helped a little. She slept better, felt less jittery during the day. Jessica noticed the pill bottle on the bathroom counter one evening and asked about it. Sarah explained, and Jessica nodded, said she understood, said she'd struggled with anxiety too. Then Jessica offered to help. "Let me manage your medications for you," she said. "You're so stressed, and I know how easy it is to forget to take them or to take too many by accident. I'll keep track, make sure you're taking the right dose at the right time." Sarah thought it was sweet. She thought it was thoughtful. She handed over the pill bottle without a second thought. That was when everything changed, although Sarah wouldn't realize it for another 2.5 years. Jessica took control of Sarah's medications, and she did it so smoothly, so naturally, that Sarah didn't question it. Every night around 10 o'clock, Jessica would bring Sarah a small white pill and a glass of water. "Take this," she'd say. "Doctor's orders." Sarah would swallow it, thank her, and go to bed. Jessica also started suggesting that Sarah cut back on caffeine, that she switch to herbal teas, that she avoid certain foods that might be triggering her anxiety. Sarah followed the advice because it made sense, and because Jessica seemed to know what she was talking about, and because Sarah trusted her completely. But what Sarah didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the pill Jessica handed her every night was Xanax. It was something else entirely. Something that would slowly, methodically, destroy her body and mind from the inside out. Sarah's health began to collapse in early 2017, about 6 months after Jessica took over her medications. It started with fatigue, the kind that made it hard to get out of bed in the morning, hard to focus at work, hard to do anything beyond the bare minimum required to survive. Sarah assumed she was just burned out. Her job was demanding, Emma was struggling with the custody arrangement, and Sarah felt like she was running on empty most days. She started drinking more coffee, trying to push through, but it didn't help. The fatigue got worse. Then came the memory problems. Sarah would forget conversations she'd had the day before, forget appointments, forget where she'd put her keys or her phone. She'd walk into a room and forget why she was there. Her coworkers started noticing. "Are you okay?" they asked. "You seem really out of it lately." Sarah brushed it off, said she was fine, just tired, but she wasn't fine. She was scared. The dizziness started next, sudden waves of vertigo that would hit her without warning, making her grab onto walls or sit down quickly before she fell. She'd be standing at the sink brushing her teeth and the room would tilt, or she'd be walking through the grocery store, and suddenly the floor would feel like it was moving beneath her feet. Then came the migraines, blinding headaches that lasted for hours, sometimes days, that made light and sound unbearable. Sarah started calling in sick to work more and more often. She spent entire days in bed with the curtains drawn, a damp cloth over her eyes, waiting for the pain to pass. Jessica was always there, bringing her water, bringing her pills, telling her it would be okay, that she just needed rest. Sarah didn't question it. She didn't question anything. She was too sick to think clearly, too exhausted to wonder why her symptoms kept getting worse instead of better. Sarah went to doctors. She went to so many doctors. Her primary care physician ran blood tests, found nothing unusual, and referred her to a neurologist. The neurologist ordered an MRI, looking for tumors or lesions or signs of multiple sclerosis, but the scan came back clean. He tested her for Lyme disease, for lupus, for thyroid disorders, for vitamin deficiencies. Every test came back negative or inconclusive. One doctor suggested it might be chronic fatigue syndrome. Another suggested fibromyalgia. A third suggested it might be psychosomatic, stress manifesting as physical symptoms. Sarah felt dismissed. She felt like no one believed her. She knew something was wrong, something real and serious, but no one could tell her what it was. Jessica went to some of the appointments with her, sat in the waiting room, held her hand when the doctors delivered more non-answers. Jessica was the only one who seemed to truly understand how bad things had gotten. Everyone else, Sarah's ex-husband David, her parents, her coworkers, they all thought she was exaggerating or being dramatic or not trying hard enough to get better. But Jessica believed her. Jessica saw her. And that made Sarah trust her even more. By the summer of 2018, Sarah had lost her job. She'd been let go after too many absences, too many mistakes, too many days where she simply couldn't function. She filed for unemployment, but the payments barely covered rent. Jessica told her not to worry, that she'd finally found work as a bartender at a restaurant downtown and she could cover groceries for a while. Sarah felt guilty but grateful. She didn't know what she would have done without Jessica. Her health continued to deteriorate. She lost weight, dropping from 140 pounds to 110 in just a few months. Her hair started falling out in clumps. Her skin took on a grayish tone. She looked sick and she felt worse. There were days when she couldn't get out of bed at all, when even lifting her head off the pillow felt like too much effort. Jessica helped her to the bathroom, helped her change clothes, brought her meals on a tray. Sarah felt like a burden. She apologized constantly. Jessica always said the same thing: "Don't be silly, that's what friends are for." Emma stopped staying over as much. David had gone back to court and requested a modification to the custody agreement, arguing that Sarah was too ill to properly care for their daughter. Sarah didn't fight it. She knew he was right. She couldn't take care of Emma when she could barely take care of herself. The judge granted David primary custody, giving Sarah supervised visitation only. Sarah was devastated. She cried for hours after the hearing, curled up in her bed, feeling like she'd lost the one thing that mattered most. Jessica held her, stroked her hair, told her it was temporary, that once she got better she'd get Emma back. Sarah wanted to believe her, but deep down she wasn't sure she was ever going to get better. She felt like she was dying slowly and no one could tell her why. Jessica had taken over more than just Sarah's medications by this point. She managed Sarah's bank accounts, paying bills online because Sarah was too foggy to keep track of due dates. She answered Sarah's phone when it rang, screening calls from Sarah's parents and brother, telling them Sarah was resting and would call them back later. She rarely did. Jessica also made all of Sarah's meals, carefully portioned, carefully prepared. Sarah ate whatever Jessica put in front of her. She didn't have the energy to cook for herself, and besides, Jessica was a good cook. Jessica also insisted on giving Sarah vitamins and supplements, saying they would help boost her immune system and give her more energy. Sarah took them without question. Every pill, every supplement, every drink Jessica handed her, Sarah consumed. She trusted Jessica completely, and that trust was killing her. In September of 2019, something happened that should have been a wake-up call but wasn't, not quite yet. Sarah's brother Mark came to visit. He'd been trying to reach Sarah for weeks, but Jessica always answered the phone and said Sarah was sleeping or too sick to talk. Mark got worried. He booked a flight to Portland without telling anyone, showed up at Sarah's apartment unannounced on a Saturday afternoon. Jessica answered the door and Mark could see the annoyance flash across her face before she smoothed it into a smile. "Hey Mark," she said. "Sarah's resting. She's not really up for visitors right now." Mark pushed past her, not rudely but firmly, and walked into the apartment. He found Sarah in her bedroom, lying in bed, looking like a ghost. She was pale, thin, her eyes sunken, her hair limp and lifeless. Mark was horrified. He sat on the edge of her bed, took her hand, asked her what the hell was going on. Sarah tried to explain. She told him about the doctors, the tests, the lack of answers. She told him she didn't know what was wrong, but that she was doing everything she could. Mark looked around the room and saw pill bottles on the nightstand, at least a dozen of them, some prescription, some over-the-counter. He picked one up, read the label. Didn't recognize the name. "What are all these?" he asked. Sarah said she didn't know, that Jessica was managing her medications. Mark's jaw tightened. He walked back out to the living room where Jessica was waiting, arms crossed. He asked her about the medications, asked why there were so many, asked what exactly she was giving Sarah. Jessica got defensive. She said she was just trying to help, that Sarah couldn't manage on her own, that Mark didn't understand how bad things had gotten. Mark said he wanted to see Sarah's medical records, wanted to talk to her doctors. Jessica said that wasn't his decision to make. They argued. It got heated. Eventually Mark left, but not before pulling Sarah aside and telling her something was wrong, that she needed to get away from Jessica, that he didn't trust her. Sarah defended Jessica. She said Mark didn't understand, that Jessica was the only person who had stuck by her through all of this. Mark left frustrated and scared. He called Adult Protective Services when he got back to his hotel, filed a report expressing concern about Sarah's living situation, and possible financial exploitation. An investigator was assigned to the case. The investigator showed up 2 weeks later, a middle-aged woman named Karen Chen who worked for the state. She interviewed Sarah, asked about her health, her finances, her living situation. Sarah was coherent enough that day to answer most of the questions. She said she was sick but being cared for. She said Jessica was her friend and was helping her. She said she wasn't being abused or exploited. Karen asked to see Sarah's bank statements. Sarah said Jessica managed those. Karen asked to see them anyway. Jessica reluctantly provided them. Karen noticed some irregularities, cash withdrawals that seemed unusual, transfers between accounts, but nothing that screamed fraud. She asked Sarah if she was aware of these transactions. Sarah said yes, that Jessica was helping pay bills. Karen left, but she kept the case open. She wasn't convinced, but she also didn't have enough evidence to intervene. Jessica knew the investigator had been there. She also knew time was running out. She needed to accelerate her plan. What Sarah didn't know, what no one knew yet, was that Jessica had taken out a life insurance policy in Sarah's name. She'd done it carefully, methodically, back in the spring of 2019. Jessica had convinced Sarah to update her will, framing it as a responsible thing to do given how sick she was. Sarah, foggy and scared, had signed the documents Jessica put in front of her without reading them carefully. The will named Jessica as the primary beneficiary of Sarah's estate, including a $500,000 life insurance policy that Jessica had purchased through an online broker, forging Sarah's signature on the application. The premiums were being paid out of Sarah's bank account, small automatic withdrawals that Sarah never noticed because Jessica handled all the finances. Jessica's plan was simple: keep Sarah drugged, keep her sick, keep her isolated, and wait for her body to give out. The doctors had already said they couldn't find anything wrong, which meant when Sarah died, they'd likely rule it as death from natural causes related to an undiagnosed chronic illness. No one would question it. Jessica would collect the insurance money, sell off Sarah's belongings, and disappear. She'd done it before, or at least tried to. That part would come out later. November 14th, 2019. That was the night everything changed. Sarah woke up that morning feeling different, and she couldn't explain why. Her head felt clearer than it had in months. The fog that had been hanging over her thoughts for so long seemed thinner, like sunlight breaking through clouds. She got out of bed without the usual wave of dizziness. She walked to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror, really looked, and she saw how bad she'd gotten. She looked like a corpse. But for the first time in a long time, her mind felt sharp. She couldn't understand it. She felt terrible the day before, barely able to lift her head, but today she felt almost normal. It didn't make sense. Jessica made breakfast that morning, scrambled eggs and toast, and Sarah ate it. Jessica seemed pleased that Sarah had an appetite. They didn't talk much. Jessica left for work around noon. She had a shift at the restaurant, wouldn't be back until late. Sarah spent the afternoon on the couch, watching television but not really paying attention. Her mind was racing. Something felt off, but she couldn't put her finger on what. When Jessica came home that night around 10:30, she brought Sarah her medication like she always did. One small white pill and a glass of water. "Take this," she said, smiling. Sarah reached for the pill, held it in her palm, looked at it. Something in her gut screamed, "Don't." She couldn't explain it. It was pure instinct. She looked up at Jessica, smiled, put the pill in her mouth, took a sip of water, and made a show of swallowing. Jessica watched her, satisfied, then took the glass and left the room. As soon as she was gone, Sarah spit the pill into her hand. She stared at it. Her heart was pounding. She didn't know why she'd done that. She didn't know what had made her pretend. But she knew somehow that it was important. She hid the pill in a tissue and tucked it into her nightstand drawer. She lay in bed, her mind racing, waiting to see if Jessica would come back to check on her. She didn't. Sarah couldn't sleep that night. She kept thinking about the pill, about the way Jessica had watched her swallow it, about how sick she'd been for so long. The next morning, Sarah felt even better, clearer, stronger. It was subtle but noticeable. She got up, made herself coffee for the first time in months, and sat at the kitchen table trying to piece together what was happening. Jessica came out of her room around 9, seemed surprised to see Sarah up and dressed. "You're feeling better," she said. Sarah nodded. "Yeah, I think so." Jessica's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's great," she said. "But don't overdo it. You need to rest." Sarah agreed, but she didn't go back to bed. She waited until Jessica left for work, then she pulled the pill out of her nightstand and looked at it closely. It was small, round, white, unmarked. It wasn't her Xanax. Xanax pills had markings on them, identifying codes. This pill had nothing. Sarah opened her laptop, which she hadn't used in weeks because she hadn't had the energy or focus, and she searched online for pill identification tools. She entered the description of the pill. The results came back with several possibilities, but one stood out: diphenhydramine. High doses of diphenhydramine, an antihistamine commonly found in sleep aids and allergy medications, can cause severe drowsiness, confusion, memory loss, cognitive impairment, and with chronic use, organ damage and neurological decline. Sarah's blood ran cold. She read more. Chronic poisoning with diphenhydramine could mimic dozens of medical conditions, making it nearly impossible to diagnose without specific toxicology testing. It could cause all the symptoms Sarah had been experiencing: fatigue, dizziness, memory loss, migraines, weight loss, confusion. She felt sick. She felt like the room was spinning. But it wasn't the dizziness she'd felt before. It was realization. It was horror. She spent the rest of the day searching her apartment while Jessica was at work. She started in Jessica's bedroom, feeling guilty at first, like she was violating her friend's privacy, but that guilt evaporated the moment she opened Jessica's nightstand drawer. Inside were bottles. Dozens of bottles, pills, diphenhydramine, acetaminophen, other medications Sarah didn't recognize. There was also a notebook, spiral-bound, filled with handwriting. Sarah opened it. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely turn the pages. What she saw made her physically ill. It was a log, a detailed, meticulous log. Dates, dosages, observations. Week 1 started with 25 milligrams. S showed no symptoms. Increased to 50. Week 10. S complaining of headaches. Good sign. Increased dosage. Week 30. S unable to work. Excellent progress. Week 62. S barely conscious most days. Increased dosage again. It went on, page after page. 3 years of notes, 3 years of poisoning. Sarah couldn't breathe. She kept reading. At the back of the notebook, tucked between the pages, was a printed document, a life insurance policy. Sarah's name, $500,000. Beneficiary, Jessica Adams. Sarah dropped the notebook. She backed out of Jessica's room, her mind spinning, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might explode. She grabbed her phone, hands shaking, and called the first person she could think of, her brother Mark. He answered on the second ring. "Sarah, what's wrong?" She couldn't speak at first. Her throat was tight, her breath coming in gasps. Mark kept saying her name, getting more frantic. Sarah finally managed to get the words out. "She's been poisoning me. Mark, Jessica's been poisoning me for 3 years. She tried to kill me." Mark went silent for a moment, then his voice came back, hard and controlled. "Where are you right now?" Sarah told him. He said, "Listen to me very carefully. Do not let her know that you know. Do not confront her. Pack a bag and get out of there right now." Sarah said she couldn't. She was too weak. She didn't have her car keys. Jessica had taken them months ago, saying Sarah was too sick to drive. Mark swore. Okay, stay calm. I'm calling the police right now. Don't hang up." But Sarah did hang up because she heard the front door open. Jessica was home early. Sarah shoved her phone in her pocket, tried to compose herself, tried to look normal. Jessica walked into the living room, saw Sarah standing there, pale and shaking. She frowned. "Are you okay?" she asked. Sarah nodded, forced a smile. "Yeah, just felt dizzy for a second." Jessica's eyes narrowed slightly, like she was evaluating whether to believe her. Then she smiled. "You should lie down. I'll bring you your medication." Sarah's stomach dropped. She said, "Actually, I'm feeling a lot better today. I think I'll skip it tonight." Jessica's expression changed. It was subtle, a flicker of something cold and hard, but Sarah saw it. "You need to take your medication," Jessica said. "The doctors said it's important." Sarah shook her head. "I just want to see how I feel without it for one night." Jessica took a step closer. Her voice was still friendly, but there was an edge to it now. "Sarah, you're not thinking clearly. You're sick. You need to take your pills. Let me help you." Sarah backed away. She said no. "I don't want to." Jessica's smile vanished. She stared at Sarah for a long moment, and Sarah saw something in her eyes that she'd never seen before. Something empty, something terrifying. "Fine," Jessica said quietly, "but you're making a mistake." She turned and walked to her bedroom. Sarah heard the door close. She stood frozen in the living room, her mind screaming at her to run, to get out, but her body felt locked in place. Then she heard Jessica's voice from the bedroom, muffled but audible, talking to someone on the phone. "I don't know, she's acting weird." "No, I think she knows. I have to move up the timeline." Sarah didn't wait to hear more. She grabbed her coat, shoved her feet into shoes, and ran for the front door. She fumbled with the lock, her hands shaking so badly she could barely turn it, but she got it open and stumbled out into the hallway. She ran down the stairs, out of the building, into the street. She didn't know where she was going. She just ran. She made it 2 blocks before her legs gave out. She collapsed on the sidewalk, gasping for air, her body shaking uncontrollably. A woman walking her dog stopped, asked if she needed help. Sarah nodded, tried to speak, but couldn't get the words out. The woman called 911. Within minutes, police and an ambulance arrived. Sarah was barely conscious by the time they loaded her into the ambulance. She kept saying the same thing over and over. "Jessica. She poisoned me. Check the pills. Check the notebook." The paramedics thought she was delirious, but one of the police officers, a veteran cop named Detective Louis Morneau, had been following up on the Adult Protective Services report filed by Sarah's brother. When he heard Sarah's name and address come over the radio, he responded to the scene. He listened to what Sarah was saying. He went to the apartment. Jessica was gone. She packed her bags and left within minutes of Sarah running out. Detective Morneau and his partner entered the apartment with a warrant obtained within hours due to the emergency circumstances. They found the notebook. They found the pill bottles. They found the forged insurance documents. They found Sarah's bank statements showing systematic financial exploitation. They found everything they needed. An APB was put out for Jessica Adams. She was arrested 36 hours later trying to board a bus to San Francisco at a Greyhound station in Eugene, Oregon. She had $5,000 in cash, a fake ID, and a one-way ticket. She didn't resist arrest. In fact, she barely reacted. When they read her rights, she just smiled. Sarah was hospitalized for 2 weeks. Doctors performed extensive toxicology testing and confirmed massive levels of diphenhydramine and other drugs in her system, levels that should have killed her. They said she survived because she'd stopped taking the pills just in time, and because her kidneys and liver, though damaged, were still functional enough to process the toxins out of her system. Her recovery was slow. It took months of physical therapy to regain her strength. It took even longer to regain her trust in anyone. She had nightmares every night, dreams where she was back in that apartment, back in that bed, Jessica standing over her with pills and water and that smile. But Sarah survived, and she decided she was going to see this through to the end. Jessica Adams was charged with attempted murder, fraud, elder abuse, identity theft, and a dozen other counts. Her bail was set at $2 million, which she couldn't pay. She sat in county jail awaiting trial. During the investigation, detectives discovered that Sarah was Jessica's first victim. There had been another woman back in 2008 in Ohio. Her name was Rachel Porter. She'd been Jessica's roommate. She got mysteriously ill over the course of a year, nearly died, but recovered after Jessica suddenly moved away. Rachel had suspected something but never had proof, never pressed charges. Detectives tracked Rachel down, interviewed her, and she broke down crying when they told her about Sarah. She said she'd always known something was wrong but had convinced herself she was being paranoid. Now she knew she was. Jessica Adams had done this before, and if she'd succeeded with Sarah, she would have done it again. The trial began in June of 2020. It lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution presented overwhelming evidence. The notebook, the pills, the financial records, the life insurance policy, testimony from doctors, from Sarah, from Rachel Porter, from Mark, from Detective Morneau. Jessica's defense attorney tried to argue that Jessica had been trying to help Sarah, that she'd been giving her over-the-counter medication she thought would ease her symptoms, that she had no intent to harm her. But the jury didn't buy it. The notebook alone was damning. The detailed logs, the increasing dosages, the observations about Sarah's declining health described with cold clinical detachment. The insurance policy sealed it. The jury deliberated for 2 hours, guilty on all counts. Jessica Adams was sentenced to 35 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. She showed no emotion when the sentence was read. She just sat there, staring straight ahead, expressionless. Sarah was in the courtroom that day. She wanted to give a victim impact statement to tell the judge and the jury and everyone what Jessica had taken from her. But when the moment came, she found she couldn't speak. The words wouldn't come. Her therapist had warned her this might happen, that trauma could rob you of your voice at the worst possible times. So her brother Mark read a statement on her behalf. He talked about how Sarah had lost 3 years of her life, how she'd lost her job, her health, her custody of her daughter, her sense of safety in the world. He talked about how Sarah still couldn't sleep without medication, how she flinched when people handed her drinks, how she'd probably never fully trust another person again. He talked about how Jessica hadn't just tried to kill Sarah's body, she'd tried to kill her spirit. And she'd nearly succeeded. When Mark finished, the courtroom was silent. The judge thanked him, then looked at Jessica and said that in 30 years on the bench, she had never seen a case so calculated, so cruel, so devoid of empathy. She said Jessica Adams was a danger to society and would remain locked away for as long as the law allowed. But the story doesn't end there. Sarah's recovery was long and painful. Physically, she regained most of her strength, though she still deals with chronic fatigue and occasional memory issues that doctors say may never fully resolve. Emotionally, the scars run deeper. She went through years of therapy, working through PTSD, trust issues, and the guilt she felt for not seeing the warning signs sooner. Her therapist told her that guilt was misplaced, that Jessica was a master manipulator, that Sarah had no reason to suspect her closest friend was systematically poisoning her. But Sarah still struggles with it. She rebuilt her relationship with her daughter Emma slowly, carefully. Emma had been too young to fully understand what happened at the time, but as she got older, Sarah explained it to her in age-appropriate terms. Emma is 17 now, a senior in high school, and she and Sarah are close. But Emma has her own trust issues, her own fear of letting people into her life. Sarah worries about that. Sarah never went back to work as a dental hygienist. She couldn't. The cognitive issues made it too difficult to focus for long periods, and besides, she didn't want to. She started writing instead. She wrote about her experience, about what happened, about what she'd learned. She published a book in 2022 called The Friend Who Tried to Kill Me, and it became a bestseller. She's been on podcasts, given interviews, spoken at conferences about recognizing manipulation and abuse in relationships. She's become an advocate for victims of poisoning and coercive control. It's given her life purpose again, but it doesn't erase what happened. Nothing can erase that. And then there's the epilogue that keeps Sarah up at night. In 2023, while serving her sentence at a federal prison in California, Jessica Adams received a letter. It was from a woman named Michelle Grant, someone Jessica had apparently known casually in Denver years ago. The letter said Michelle had heard about Jessica's case, felt terrible about what happened, but believed there must have been some misunderstanding. She said she'd always thought Jessica was kind and caring, and she wanted to stay in touch, maybe visit sometime. Jessica wrote back. The letters were monitored by prison officials as part of her supervision, and one of the guards flagged them as concerning. Jessica's response was friendly, warm, full of self-pity and claims of innocence. She said she'd been wrongly convicted, that Sarah had turned everyone against her, that she just wanted a chance to rebuild her life when she got out. She told Michelle she'd learned so much, grown so much, and couldn't wait to reconnect with old friends. The guard forwarded the letters to Sarah's victim advocate, who forwarded them to Sarah. Sarah read them and felt physically ill because she recognized the pattern, the manipulation, the grooming. Jessica was doing it again from prison with a woman she barely knew. Sarah contacted the FBI. They investigated Michelle Grant, interviewed her, and discovered that Michelle was vulnerable, recently divorced, struggling financially, lonely. Exactly Jessica's type. The FBI warned Michelle to cease all contact with Jessica Adams. Michelle was shocked, said she'd had no idea, said she just wanted to be kind to someone who seemed to be suffering. She cut off contact immediately. But the incident made Sarah realize something terrifying. Jessica Adams hadn't changed. She would never change. And when she gets out of prison in 35 years, assuming she serves her full sentence, she'll be 72 years old, still alive, still capable, still dangerous. Psychologists who evaluated Jessica during the trial diagnosed her with antisocial personality disorder and narcissistic personality disorder. In layman's terms, she's a psychopath. She has no empathy, no remorse, no capacity for genuine human connection. She views people as objects to be used for her own benefit. She's incapable of change because she doesn't believe there's anything wrong with her. To Jessica, what she did to Sarah was justified. Sarah had something Jessica wanted: a life, stability, a child, connections. Jessica believed she deserved those things more than Sarah did, so she decided to take them. And when that didn't work, when Sarah survived, Jessica didn't feel guilt. She felt inconvenienced. That's what makes her so dangerous. That's what keeps Sarah awake at night. Sarah Mitchell is 43 years old now. She lives in a different city, a place she's asked not to be disclosed for her own safety. She's dating someone, a man she met through a support group for abuse survivors, and it's going slowly, carefully. She's learning to trust again, but it's hard. She still has moments where someone hands her a drink and she freezes, where someone offers to help her with something and she wonders what their real motive is. She probably always will, but she's alive. She survived, and she's determined to make sure her story helps other people recognize the warning signs before it's too late. Because the truth is, what happened to Sarah can happen to anyone. Jessica Adams wasn't a monster with horns and a tail. She was charming, she was helpful, she was someone you'd want as a friend. That's what made her so dangerous. She knew how to identify vulnerable people, how to isolate them, how to make them dependent, how to destroy them slowly enough that no one noticed until it was too late. And she's not unique. There are other people like her out there, right now, inserting themselves into people's lives, gaining their trust, and using that trust to cause harm. They're not always trying to kill. Sometimes they're just trying to control or exploit or manipulate. But the pattern is the same, and the damage is real. So here's what I want you to think about as we close this story. What would you have done? Would you have caught the red flags, the controlling behavior, the isolation from friends and family, the insistence on managing medications? Or would you, like Sarah, have trusted someone until it was almost too late? It's easy to say you would have known better, that you would have seen it coming. But Jessica fooled doctors, therapists, social workers, everyone. She was that good at what she did. And that's the terrifying part. The person who wants to hurt you isn't going to announce their intentions. They're going to smile and offer help and make you feel like they're the only one who truly understands you. And by the time you realize what's happening, you might be too sick, too isolated, too dependent to get away. Sarah wants people to know that it's okay to question. It's okay to set boundaries. It's okay to say no, even to someone who's been helping you, especially if something feels off. Trust your instincts. If someone is trying to isolate you from your support system, that's a red flag. If someone is trying to control aspects of your life that they shouldn't have access to, like your medications or your finances, that's a red flag. If someone reacts with anger or manipulation when you try to assert independence, that's a red flag. Don't ignore those feelings. Don't rationalize them away. Don't tell yourself you're being paranoid or ungrateful. Your instincts exist for a reason. Sarah ignored hers for too long, and it almost cost her everything. And one more thing. If you know someone who's in a situation like Sarah's, someone who seems to be declining under the care of a friend or family member, someone who's isolated and sick and not getting better despite treatment, speak up. Call Adult Protective Services. Talk to their doctors. Don't assume everything is fine just because the caregiver seems nice or because the victim says they're okay. Sarah's brother Mark saved her life by refusing to accept Jessica's reassurances, by pushing past the boundaries Jessica had set up, by filing that report even though it felt uncomfortable. If he hadn't, Sarah would be dead. Sometimes being a good friend or family member means being willing to be the bad guy, to ask hard questions, to make people angry. It's worth it. Sarah Mitchell is alive today because she pretended to swallow a pill. One small act of instinct, of resistance, in a moment when her mind was finally clear enough to question what was happening. That's all it took. One night, one decision, and it changed everything. But she shouldn't have had to make that decision. She shouldn't have been in that position in the first place. And the fact that she was, the fact that someone she loved and trusted spent 3 years systematically poisoning her, is a reminder that evil doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it looks like kindness. Sometimes it looks like friendship. Sometimes it looks like love. And that's the most frightening thing of all. So leave your answer in the comments. What would you have done? Would you have seen the signs? And if this story affected you, if it made you think differently about trust and friendship and vulnerability, then share it. Because somewhere out there, someone else might be in Sarah's situation right now, and they need to know they're not crazy, they're not paranoid, and they're not alone. And maybe, just maybe, hearing this story will give them the courage to pretend to swallow the pill, to ask the hard questions, to get out before it's too late. That's what Sarah hopes for. That's why she's willing to tell her story, even though it's painful, even though it means reliving the worst years of her life. Because if it saves even one person, it's worth it. And if you made it to the end of this video, thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, the most dangerous person in your life might be the one you trust most. Stay safe out there.